The second part of this webinar is about style, the way that you write a grant. And I'm focusing particularly here on grants. Think about who your donor is, and more specifically, who is it that decides? So if your donor has a committee and the people that you're talking to aren't actually the ones that, decide, they are the managers of the fund, but they're not the people who decide on where the money goes, you need to be talking to the members of that committee. So knowing who they are can be very helpful. For example, and you'll see this in an example later on, do the people who decide know what a makerspace is? We've had to do a lot of education in our funding bids to tell people about what a makerspace is. Because even though the fund managers might know what a makerspace is, the people you talk to might know what a makerspace is, the people who make the decision might not, because they are in business, they're in academia, they're in government, and they're not in this world of makerspaces. So speak to those people and make it easy for them to understand what it is. And the other thing about, making it easy for them is repeat their objectives back to them. And I'll give you an example now. But I talked about this in the previous session with the project title. So if the funding opportunity is about looking at plastic waste challenges in Waste Africa, then your project title could be Plastic Recycling Solutions in West Africa to Generate Economic Opportunities, or something. Like, just really repeat back to them what the objectives are. But when you're writing the detail of the funding bid, you might do something like this. What you're looking at now is a page from the beginning of the funding bid for this project, the Innovative Manufacturing in Africa project in 2024. And what RISA said they wanted was 4 things. They wanted to build on demonstrated success of the 2023 project. They wanted a clear trajectory to ecosystem level impact. They wanted to demonstrate sustainability beyond RISA fund support, and they wanted to produce learning about what works. So those were the 4 objectives that the donor had. I see your question. If you want to take screenshots, feel free, but all of these materials are going to be available afterwards and open source as well. But yeah, this is the outline for the current project. So what I did, as you can see on the screen, is I took those 4 objectives, literally copied them off the website onto the page, and then organized my work, my proposal, around those 4 objectives. I made it easy for the donor to understand how I'm meeting their objectives. So the first one, I even changed it a bit. I put with packages of capacity building, like the session today. And I've really sort of directly answered how this project is going to achieve these 4 objectives. So I took the donor objectives and I made them the objectives of the project. And I started to describe how we would meet those objectives. Moreover, further down in the bid, when they asked about what the activities are going to be, I actually listed the activities according to the donor objectives. So the first donor objective is build on the demonstrated success of the current project. And then I added with packages of capacity building, and here we are, package 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So their first objective was objective number 1, So I called my activities 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. So we are currently in the accessing funding package. So this paragraph here is what I wrote that basically funded what we're doing today and this whole capacity building package that we're offering. So I took their objective number 1, I labeled the activities 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, made it really simple. I took their objective 2, a clear trajectory to system level impact, ecosystem level impact. And again, I labeled the activities we wanted to do under that heading, 2, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. We've got quite a lot of activities in this project, so it was really important to organize it well. And what we've ended up doing as well is that each one of these, activity 1.1, 1.2, activity 2.2, 2.3, has a line in the budget, in the overall budget for it. So the donor can look at their own objective, the activities we're doing under that objective, and the line in the budget. And it all just makes perfect sense, really easy to follow from one to the other. So that's a fairly brute force way of making it easy for them to understand and repeating their objectives back to them. It's actually, assuming you've got the space to do it in the application form, this is actually a very effective way of fundraising, and it makes your life easier when it comes to delivery as well. A little bit more about style. I can't believe the number of people who do not do this. It is extraordinary. It's extraordinary to me how many people do not answer the question in the first sentence. Because in terms of style, that is key. Do you know what you're talking about? Do you have the confidence to answer the question? I'll give you an example. This is one of the best funding bids I ever wrote. It was for the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, and it was for a very weird, strange, unusual funding opportunity called Accelerating the Journey to Scale. It was not a scaling fund. It was not a fund to help you scale your innovation. It was a fund to help you get ready to scale your innovation. It was a strange call. What's the first question there? It is, what is your long-term scaling goal? And my answer was, our long-term scaling goal is. Answer the question in the first sentence. The second question, describe the evidence you have already generated. My answer was, our evidence is. Answer the question straight away in the first sentence. What you see on the screen also is that I then break it down into more detail. And I use, because I could, because this was a Microsoft Word document that they wanted submitted, I use bold to highlight the key points of each bullet point. So it's about making locally, it's about transforming supply chains, it's about supporting humanitarian relief workers, and it's supporting people who've been affected by disaster. And then your specific goal for the grant is at the bottom, because you've got the big picture and you want to be more specific. Okay? So if your question is, what is the aim of your project? Start the sentence with, the aim of the project is. So another way of saying this, and I cannot recommend this enough, this is absolutely essential, particularly for people like you and me, who are perhaps more technologically minded, and we were perhaps taught to write like science students with a an introduction and a description of the methodology, and then somewhere near the bottom a conclusion. My recommendation is write like you're writing a newspaper. Do not say, if this, then that. And I'm not just talking about the beginning of an answer. I'm talking about any sentence in your funding bid. Do not say, if this, then that. Say, that because this. The project will make a difference because it will reach people that have never been able to access a makerspace before. We will help people have access to healthcare because we're manufacturing medical devices that are more affordable. That because this. Put the impact first. Don't say because we're going to make medical devices and that will mean that we're going to be able to help people get access to healthcare. No. Don't write like that. In case I haven't emphasized this enough, and I'm sorry if I'm going off on one here. If you are asked what is the goal, and I see this all the time, people write like this. Given X and because of Y, which is important because of Z, then what we want to do is A. And then because, and that will be good because of B and perhaps even C. Literally, I mean, people who have got 10, 15 years in fundraising still write like this. What is the goal? And then the goal is probably the answer A, but it's buried somewhere through the third paragraph. And people can't tell what the goal is. You're not making it easy. You're not making it easy for the donor. I'm going to go back to this slide again. You're not making it easy for them to understand what you're doing. Literally, particularly engineers who are used to writing if this, then that statements. I see this all the time. Don't do it. If you've got a question, what is the goal? Answer like a newspaper. The goal is. Because of this and that. So what I mean by writing like a newspaper article, a well-written newspaper article, will give you the most important thing, at least in their perspective, the most important thing first. It'll tell you a few other important things in the next paragraphs. It'll then get into some details and explanations, and then it'll do something to wrap it up. So that's what I've done on this example here. Our long-term scaling goal is, it's the most important thing first. I've then said other important things and given some detail and explanations. And then I've done something to wrap it up, a specific goal for the grant underneath. Right. There's my slide gone. Here we go. So the most important thing first, other important things, details and explanations, something to wrap it up. If the question is, what is the goal? Say, the goal is. Do you get the point? I might be willing to move on from this point, but if there's one thing you remember from today's session, this is it. Okay, other things in terms of style. Please don't say aim to. This project aims to. Don't say that. Unless you really want to be vague, try to eliminate the word, try to aim to, with the objective of, with the goal of. Say the project will. It will do this. You sound more authoritative. You sound more confident. You sound like somebody that the donor can rely on and that they want to fund you to make this happen. So that's another thing in terms of style. Never say aim to, always say will. Now, hopefully, Martin, don't say it. What you might say with words like hopefully is the occasions when you might say that might be in circumstances where it goes beyond your control. So if you can't control for that in the project, for example, hopefully the president of Kenya will visit FabLab Winam as part of our Engaging with Ministers project. You can't control whether the president of Kenya is going to turn up or not, right? You can't control that in your project. You can control, perhaps, for how many makers are in the class, because maybe you'll recruit 30 people and then you'll select 15 or something. You can control for that. And maybe you'll have some backups in case anyone drops out. But yeah, so the time to use words like aims to or hopeful is when you actually do need to be vague. When there are things beyond your control that you can't actually promise to. Another writing tip, another important style thing, do not use ing words. Use them as little as possible. And when you use them properly. When something is a continuous process. So let me give you some examples. With the permission of Joseph from the African Makerspace Network, I'm using this as an example of what not to write. So thank you to Joseph. And I want to point out right now that this was the first draft of the document. This was not the final draft. That's on the next slide. Okay, so what you're looking at is it's not a funding bid, but I want to give you a good example of writing style. This is the executive summary of the African Makerspace Networks and the Make Project's common policy agenda. So this is a document that is meant to be put in front of politicians to help them understand how they can best support makerspaces. Okay? In yellow, I've highlighted the ing words. There's a lot. Let's have a look at in this section here. I'm going to put the mouse to the side so you can see it. In this section here, this sentence, makerspaces are dynamic entities that play a transformative role in tackling diverse challenges, making notable contributions to global policy initiatives like the Sustainable Development Goals. Science, technology, the African Union, that is a very long sentence. So one thing I'm going to come on to that is the length of your sentences. And you'll see how it's improved in the next slide. But here you've got tackling and making notable contributions. So it's got a passive voice. It sounds like something that just is continuous, and that's how you should be using ing words. It's just something that continues, right? What you should be saying in that sentence, the way I would recommend that you write this, is makerspaces tackle diverse challenges and make notable contributions to global policy initiatives like the SDGs. They are dynamic entities that play a transformative role in their communities. So that's rewriting this sentence here to get rid of the ing words. And by doing that, it sounds less passive, more active, more definitive, and therefore more convincing. So this executive summary was rewritten over mainly by Joseph and Frida from the Fab City Foundation. And it ended up looking more like this. And they realized their audience was different, and the audience, the policymakers, might not know what a makerspace is. So they completely changed tack. and the policy recommendations are further down in the executive summary. But the only time when you see ing words now is when there are things that are continuous processes, making things, learning, prototyping, emerging, achieving, pressing. Those are continuous things. And that's the only occasion when they use it now. So they don't say, for example, here, as transformative forces in addressing multifaceted challenges. No, they say, as transformative forces that address multifaceted challenges. So I've labored this point a lot again, but yeah, don't use passive voice and the ing words. Try and eliminate them unless it is actually something that is a continuous process. And it just reads much more definitively and authoritatively. Right, another style thing, and this is hard. Use consistent terms throughout the bid. The previous example came from the MAKE project, which is African makerspace ecosystems. That was for a funding call for digital innovation hubs. So during that funding bid, we didn't really use the word makerspace, because at the beginning of the bid, we convinced them, we made an argument that a makerspace is a digital innovation hub for hardware. So basically, and literally, what we did is we did a find and replace in the document for any time we said the word makerspace, more or less, apart from in the introduction, and replaced it with the consistent term hardware digital innovation hubs, because that was what the donor wanted to hear. Because after a few pages of reading, and this bid was 70 pages long, after a few pages of reading, they might forget that makerspaces are digital innovation hubs for hardware. So we used the consistent term throughout to speak to their objectives, and we didn't interchange between the word makerspaces and the phrase hardware DIHs. In the RISA project, the project we're working on right now that this webinar is part of, we didn't say, the Maker passport system, the map of machines, the payment system, the SeekMake platform. We just use a catch-all term of innovative infrastructures, because ecosystems depend on infrastructures. So, and because the RISA is the Research and Innovation Systems for Africa, we use the word innovation. So yeah, innovative infrastructures became the catch-all term that we use consistently throughout the bid. And there's another funding bid, which was a real headache, and I might show you a slide of that. I don't know if it's the next slide or later on. I think it's later on, where you have to differentiate between a component, a product, an ecosystem, and a process, and a purpose, and my God, it just gets really complicated for some of the more esoteric projects. So yeah, use consistent terms throughout the bid. So we have a question, I think, what about using too much transition words like moreover, furthermore? I quite like those transition words, but I would always put them at the start of a sentence. So use them sparingly, otherwise it just becomes a bit. Don't use them very often, but when you do use them, what they do is that they have the effect of emphasizing what's coming next. So it's an intensifier. It's almost like a swear word. A swear word is an intensifier. It makes what you're saying more intense. Meanwhile, and furthermore, do that as well. So, but I would generally put full stop, furthermore, XYZ, or full stop, moreover, XYZ, because then it doesn't sound like you're just listing things. And if you're listing things, it can be really hard to read. unless it's, you know, a bullet point list, but it can be really hard to read. So just, you know, use it at the beginning of a sentence. That would be my advice there in terms of style. Thank you for that question. I might see if we can add that into the slides. Okay, what other style tips do I have? Use labels for multi-part questions. Donors shouldn't do this. They really shouldn't, but they have to occasionally. So here is from the writer bid, a screenshot from the writer bid for this project, right? And the question at the top is, who will be the likely beneficiaries, local partners and stakeholders? They have asked 3 questions in one. And donors do this all the time, and it's just a pain. And sometimes you don't know if they're just saying words because they can't quite find the right thing to say, or are they actually asking for the beneficiaries, the local partners and the stakeholders? I take the question at face value. They're asking 3 questions in one. And happily, in this case, we had a good word count. So what I did is I used labels for the multi-part question. Makerspaces and their stakeholders, and partners. So the beneficiaries are the makerspaces. Then you've got the stakeholders and partners. I haven't answered it in the question, in the order of the question. You don't need to. But I have answered the question and made it really simple for the person reading it, or the people reading it, to understand. And I went, like I said before, you go straight into the answer. The 9 makerspaces are Triple Dimension, Kamasi Hive, Gearbox, FabLab Winamp, and so it goes through the list. So yeah, use labels for multi-part questions, and beware the multi-part question, because they might say, tell us your aims and objectives. Well, those are 2 different things. That's a multi-part question. Okay. This is another style thing, and sometimes this is a real challenge. If you want to be non-committal, if you don't want to commit to doing something, it's easy to sound vague. You know, there might be people who leave the makerspace and they go and get jobs in industry, or they get jobs in manufacturing, or they set up their own startups, or they do a variety of things. They do they go on to lots of different things, a range of careers when they leave the makerspace. It sounds vague. That I don't feel like you're answering the question when you say a range of things, lots of different things, a variety of things. Don't do that. Use phrases like such as, or for example, and it makes it sound more knowledgeable. But the other thing is, for example and such as also doesn't commit you to anything. So you cannot promise that all of the trainees from your Makerspace training course are going to get jobs, are going to have successful startups or get jobs in manufacturing. You can't promise that. You can't control for it. You can help them to do it, but you can't control for it. You can't promise it. So you can use phrases like such as or for example. What you can promise is that they will receive all of the skills needed to potentially do something like that. But you can't control for whether they actually go and do it. So using phrases like such as or for example is much better than a variety of, or a range of. So keep an eye out for that. Short, sharp sentences. If you can, replace a comma with a full stop and make a new sentence. If you see lots of commas in your sentence, rewrite it, make it into 3 sentences. Short, sharp sentences. It sounds like you know what you're talking about, and it's also easier to read. It's sometimes quite helpful to use short summaries of your idea to simplify complex paragraphs or complex ideas. And this is where I'm going to show you the National Science Foundation funding bid that I mentioned earlier. This was an absolutely insane application because what we're trying to propose is so big and so grandiose and so esoteric, hard to grasp. This is the introduction. And in the introduction, we've already got 5 references, and we've got things in italics, and we've got, different levels of argument. It's incredibly, it is exactly what the donor wanted. And we know the audience. The audience that we have to convince here is a group of high-flying academics in the United States. So if we didn't have references, they wouldn't believe us. If we didn't make a comprehensive argument, then we wouldn't convince them. So we had to write it like this. But what it helps to have is a short summary of your idea to simplify a complex paragraph or a complex idea. So at the bottom, after my colleagues wrote this really rather brilliant introduction to what is a very difficult to explain project with lots of different terms, I wrote this sentence. This means that this is what we mean by an Internet of Production ecosystem supporting a manufacturing commons. The Internet of Production is the product. The Internet of Production ecosystem is the process. And the manufacturing commons is the purpose. This is another good example for the same funder. This is not my funding bid, so I'd like to recognize OSHWA, the Open Source Hardware Association. And they wrote something here which screamed out to me on the page that these people know what they're talking about, because they were able to take a very, very complex idea of the challenges of globalized supply chains and turn it into a very short, memorable phrase. They're saying that closed and proprietary medical devices often don't reach people because those people are too poor, too remote, or too specific to benefit from mass manufactured products. So if you need a particular type of wheelchair, good luck to you. That's going to be expensive because it can't be mass produced. If you live in a remote island in the Pacific Ocean, good luck to you. Globalization isn't going to help you because you're too remote. Or if you can't afford, if you don't have the money, so even if you're in a big city like London, where there's, I don't know, a couple of million people living in poverty in my city, there's a lot of people can't get access to globalized products. So, they're too poor, too remote, or too specific to benefit from mass production. And that phrase was really good because it summarizes a very complex idea. Sorry, a very complex idea of the challenges of international supply chains. So that was a great example. And just like any good poet, I might try and nick that phrase from them in some of the communications work that I do in the future.